So once you get your sort of items organized, you bring them in, um, and you kind of got your stuff kind of the way that you want it to be in there, then you can go ahead and start actually working with really animating and changing things around, right? Um, so one thing that you might want to think about too is how you bring in your files is kind of important, right? So there's different file formats. So if I go in here to File, Import, and I go back to my original spot where all of my things were, you'll notice that I have like options here to bring in let's see, back here, we'll go back to we'll have a whole bunch of options in here to bring in like a PNG, right? So if I bring in the PNG file, the good thing about PNGs is that the background's kind of been deleted away from them, like in Photoshop. So if I go back to Comp One and I drop that PNG in there, it's going to be basically the background is empty now, right? Versus the Photoshop file that I brought in where the background is kind of still there. So that can be useful. That'll be a useful thing for you to think through. Also, if you go to File, go back to Import again, you'll see that there are like you know there's JPEGs in here too. If I bring a JPEG version of that in, it's going to have the whole like white. It's going to have the big white square around it again, which I didn't really like in the first place, right? So that's important stuff to think about. The other thing to know is if I go back to File, Import again, and let's say I want to bring in this the PSD version of the smoke thing, but it's going to ask me like, how do I want to bring it in? Do I want to bring it in as a footage, or do I want to bring it in as like a composition? Do I want, how do I want it to kind of be presented? So I brought it in the first time as footage, but this time I'm going to bring it in as a comp, which means it's going to watch what happens when I do that. And I click open. Okay. Now that whole thing, that whole item is going to come in as a big comp. So if I double click it now, I can open up the comp itself, so that comp up there sits alongside the big comp that I'm working on, where all of the assets are going to be placed. So the cool thing about this is if I grab that comp and drag it on here, now you'll see that it's pretty short. So I can always one thing you can do is if you zoom in, you can make your footage longer or shorter by just pulling back and forth on it like that. But now what I could do is if I wanted that comp to be to get rid of the white square behind it, I could double click it, and you'll notice in here in this in the comp itself, not in the one that I'm working on, but in this actual comp there, it has the background. I could just click that and delete it, and it'll get rid of the background. And then I'm actually able to kind of have it be transparent, but I can go back into Photoshop and edit it if I want to. So I could go back to Photoshop and edit it, and it'll live update the whole thing. So a good example too would be if my comp is short, like I made my composition too short when it came in, I could click there and go to composition settings, and I can make this the duration of that a lot longer, right? So right now it's like barely even, it's hardly anything. So let's just make that a 5-minute or a 5-second thing. Click OK, and now if I go back into my original comp, now you can see that this is much longer, and so it's just going to sit there a lot longer. It won't go away quite as fast. So again, there's lots and lots of options of things that you can do, like with how you import and bring your items in. So I'm just going to delete some of this stuff out of here, just out of the timeline, so I can kind of clean things up. So if this is my footage that I kind of want to start with, and then I want to add something over the top of it that does something that moves around, there's a number of things that I can do, and this is where the power of After Effects comes in, which is this thing called keyframes. So we're going to talk about some basic keyframing now. So I'll just grab something that I can play around with. So for now I'll just grab this PNG and drop it down in here. And so now I could resize this by just clicking and dragging on it and making it maybe the size that I wanted to. Let's say I wanted to have it start up here at this corner and then drop itself down and go off of the screen over here. The way that I do this now is this is just a single like solo PNG image, right? There's nothing else to it. It just is there all by itself. But what I can do is if I click the twirl down here and I keep going into transform, you'll notice that there's a whole bunch of options that I can play with here. And the one that we want to play with in this case is called position. So if I pull my playhead all the way back to where I want this action to begin, and I click position, so that's going to drop a keyframe, these little diamonds that you'll see show up. The keyframing kind of stopwatch has been highlighted. Let's say I wanted to go in and I can zoom out a little bit if that's helpful, so I can see seconds a little bit better. So maybe I want to say by like the second I want this image to kind of be halfway. What I can do is I can move the playhead and then just click on that item and drag it, and you'll notice that it creates this kind of little trail behind it, right? And what the computer has done is it's interpreted that position from point A to point B in time, so from here to here, and it's just basically moving the item for me, right? And then if I say, okay, by like 4 seconds, I want this thing to be all the way off the screen, I can just click and drag it so it's away. And now those keyframes are basically moving the item across the screen, right? And you can see the path, and these little points here on the screen represent the points of the keyframe. So, you know, if I wanted there to be a little bit of a jump, I could go halfway and then move this up a little bit, right? And then it will, you know, it added a keyframe to the timeline, so about 1 second in, and then it's going to jump down. So I could really kind of go a little bit crazy if I wanted to, and you know, we'll see what happens if I do this. So now when you look at what happens, it's going to bounce really fast, right? So that's just the amount of time between them. If I don't like that quickness, I can always kind of stretch the keyframes out by just grabbing them in the timeline and scooting them around so they're not all so close together, and now maybe it looks a little bit better, right? You know, so that's the basics of keyframing, is you're telling After Effects to do something to one of the assets or items that you have over a period of time, and each keyframe is a new place you're telling it to go. So, and you can keyframe lots of different kind of like things down here, like attributes, right, basically, to the whole thing. So if I wanted to, I could actually change like the scale too. So if I went ahead and clicked the stopwatch here, and then I went to that spot, and I can either click and drag on the item, or I can just slide the sliders here, right? But now I could make my item go from big, you know, to pretty small in a short amount of time, right? Now if we watch what happens, you know, I can make the item look a little bit bigger by just cranking it up a little more. And so you can play with your sort of the things that you're animating as they go, right? So again, so it's animating the position, like where it is. It's animating the scale over that time. I can animate rotation, so I could make the rotation of this. Something could happen there. So if I click the stopwatch here, it's going to put a diamond keyframe there, and then I can move it forward and crank the rotation around like this, and it'll tip itself all the way over. So I can go back here and change the rotation again back. And if you wanted to make something spin, like let's say we wanted it to kind of spin from here to there, I would put a keyframe, so that's going to hold my rotation variable in that spot, and then I'd go forward just a little bit more, and I will crank this thing, and you see these double zeros, like basically it's going to crank it 166 times. So now as I go through, it's going to go crazy as it spins. So you know, and of course I could also change the opacity, so I could keyframe the opacity here if I wanted to make it kind of disappear by clicking there. And then if I went forward a little bit, I could go down to 0, and if I go forward a little bit more and crank it back up to 100%, now I have a keyframe here that's, you know, if I double click on it, it'll show me what the variable I've placed in there is. So it's at 100%, and then this keyframe is 0, and this keyframe is going to be 100 again. So now as I scroll through, now as I play through, it'll just disappear. So it's pretty basic stuff. It just basically you're telling it what to do on these variables over time, and you can speed up or slow them down by, like, again, just stretching out where the keyframes kind of hit in the timeline. So there's a lot of power here, a lot of crazy things that you can do in a really short amount of time with playing around with basic keyframes on different items. So that would be how you would keyframe, like something like a photograph or like these scanned images or things. But you can also you can move video footage around. You can do all kinds of other things. And also, if you create your own shapes, which I'll talk to you about in the next video, if you're going to kind of create your own shapes, you can keyframe shapes also that are just kind of created in After Effects and aren't things that you import in. So that would be the general gist of how you would go about making sort of images and shapes and abstract items kind of scoot around the screen and turn into something, that transform it into something different based on your imagination.